great to see everyone here. I'm very excited to be speaking at DjangoCon. My name is Karen Tracey. I can hear myself echoing. That's interesting. I am a Django web developer. I work at Cactus, which is a web development shop right around the corner here. I have been using Django since 2007, I think, so a long time. And several years ago, maybe I think it was 2020, I started to hear about this tool called htmx, and then more recently about tools like Alpine.js. And they were creating a lot of buzz in the community about using these tools and the excitement and the power of these tools. And at Cactus, we took that in and we started looking around at it, and we started using some of these tools. And then this year I thought, well, maybe it's time for a how's it going kind of talk, and what's working out and what's not working out with, or what challenges might you be facing if you're using these tools. So that's what this talk is about. It's going to, let's see, oh, I can use this clicker thing. Yes. The roadmap for the talk is, I'm going to start with talking about the promise that we saw in this tool combination, Django, htmx, and Alpine. Both individually and in combination, which is probably a lot. You all may have heard some of this already in other talks. And then talk about some of our experience with using this tool combination, what we've done with it on new projects, existing projects, and then kind of switch gears and talk more about some of the struggles, some of the challenges you might face using this tool combination. And then finally wrap up with some assessment and future plans we have for continued use of this. I don't need to walk over there. I can use this thing. I have interspersed some pictures in my presentation to break up the walls of text. I enjoy vacationing in the Outer Banks here in North Carolina. So all these pictures actually are from Nag's Head, and they're chosen to try and evoke the feelings and or convey the concepts that I'm talking about in the slides. So they're not entirely random. And in this case, for example, this is a sunrise and a picture, maybe a promise of a great day to come. There are some clouds there as well. So maybe it won't be an entirely sunny day. So what is the promise of Django? I'm kind of conflicted about how much I need to say about the promise of Django to this audience, given you all probably use Django and know the promise of Django. So I feel like I shouldn't have to say much, but at the same time, it is like the big thing. It is our framework of choice at Cactus. It was my framework of choice before I started at Cactus. So there's a lot in it, and there's a lot of promise in it. It has a powerful ORM, object relational mapper, so you can access your database from Python code in an intuitive fashion without having to learn SQL. It has support for migration, so as your data schema changes over time, you can automatically get your database updated. It has a cool and powerful tool, contrib admin, that lets you see into your database with minimal configuration. You can do some pretty powerful things with Django admin, and that's a big boost to your beginning any project to be able to just easily see what's in your database. It has a templating language for HTML templating that supports reuse in a couple of different ways, by extending from templates with defined blocks, or by including little snippets of reusable HTML in your templates. It supports authentication, so you don't have to worry about how to do that properly without introducing security flaws. It has a permissions framework, so you can manage permissions assigned with users, associated with groups, put users in groups. There's URL routing that supports allowing you to name your view functions so that you can sort of more intuitively access them in your code. And also forms are a big portion. And there was a great talk yesterday by Josh Thomas, I think, about a modern take on Django forms. And if you didn't see that talk, I'd strongly recommend you go see it. forms support both rendering the form and the inputs at the HTML level, and then gathering the data as it is posted by the form, and validating the data. So it's a big piece that has some complexity to it because there is complexity involved in both rendering and validating data. Finally, where Django does not have something, there is a strong ecosystem of third-party packages that you can take advantage of. One example you might immediately think of is Django doesn't support a REST framework. So there is an external third-party REST framework package. There have been many, actually. Anything that you need to do in your project that is sort of common, you can probably find a third-party package that does it. So the overall promise that I saw with Django when I started using it and continue to see is it provides all the tools I need to do all the common things of a web development so that I can focus on the unique aspects of the project I'm working on that are not shared across a lot of different projects. There is one area of modern web development where Django is silent and does not provide much guidance, and that is the front end. Django has no opinion on what you do on your front end. You can use whatever CSS framework you like. You can use whatever JavaScript framework you like. Django is a backend framework, so it doesn't say you should use React or Vue or jQuery. You can use any of those things, and they will work. So this makes things a little hazy in cases where you're wanting to do a modern, fancy, progressive web application. Like, how do you do it? You need more than just your basic HTML, full page reloads at form submissions and full page reloads no matter what you do. So you do need something on the front end, but Django doesn't provide that, any guidance on where you might want to go there. And over time, I guess when I started, the most common thing I saw used was jQuery, which was fine. You could annotate, you could, sprinkle some jQuery in your projects and get some user interactivity. But over time, more and more front-end web frameworks grew up that became bigger and bigger and sort of overlapped in what they did with what Django did. Like, for example, the frameworks would expect that instead of sending HTML, the server would be sending JSON. And then it would be the responsibility of the front-end framework to take the JSON and turn that into HTML. So you have a template engine from Django on the back end that you're not going to use because actually all your HTML generation is going to be on the front end. So there's this duality of function, and then you face the choice of, well, which of those do I want to use? And are there cases where I want to use Django templating versus the front-end templating? So there's complications and confusions that can arise, and duplication, and also sort of as the front-end framework becomes bigger, there's more and more to learn. There's less and less likely that a single developer can understand all of Django and all of the front-end framework. So you wind up with teams where you've got front-end specialists who can do the front end, back-end specialists who can do the back end, and they kind of don't share information. They can't share a lot. So that's where these tools, when we started to hear about them, offered a lot of promise, I thought. I'll start with htmx. There was a great talk with htmx with Chris May yesterday, and he mentioned the same thing I have first here on this slide, which is HTML out of the box offers two elements that you can interact with the server with, and that's the form and the anchor tag. And what htmx provides is to say you can annotate your HTML with more attributes and indicate that this element, which is not a form or an anchor tag, is going to cause a request to the server when the user does this thing. So what htmx provides is more rich server interactivity with your HTML, accomplished by annotating your HTML with additional attributes defined by htmx. htmx itself is a JavaScript library that does all the JavaScript needed to do that so that you don't have to do it yourself. This paradigm expects that the server is going to be returning HTML, and then you instruct htmx via the attributes you add to your HTML where you want that returned HTML to go on your page. And it's a dependency-free library. It's really easy to add to a project, and it's really easy to get started using it. I had a thought of something else I was going to say here, and it went out of my head. I hate when that happens. It'll probably come back to me. It'll come back to me. So htmx offers more flexibility. It's kind of an extension to HTML that allows you to interact with the server with more flexibility than basic HTML. The piece that htmx does not have is what Alpine.js offers. So with htmx, you can interact with your server. With Alpine.js, you can interact with your user and have data associated with your HTML components that maybe needs to get updated as the user interacts with the page, all without yet communicating anything to the server. So you can annotate your HTML similar to htmx. You can annotate your HTML with additional attributes to say this div has this data associated with it. And as the user does things in that page, you might increment a counter, you might indicate that the user has chosen this option, and therefore we should show these other things. So it's more annotation of your HTML, and it supports the front-end state maintenance that you might need to keep track of as the user interacts with the page and as you want to change what they're doing. Oh, I know what I wanted to say on that previous slide. What htmx offers takes you a long way towards making your web app look a lot more modern. You can, get server interaction just by scrolling or by clicking on something, and the result can update just part of the page. And that takes you a long way towards getting a much more rich user experience than you get with out-of-the-box HTML. But it doesn't have this state management. You might need to keep track of state on the front end before you interact with your server. And that's what you can get with Alpine.js, which is some more attributes you can add to your HTML, also some properties and methods. But it's not big. It's not a huge framework. It's more of a lightweight framework, or I'm not sure if they call themselves a framework or a library. It's also lightweight, and it's easy to add to a project. So with this combination of tools, I thought we would have a nirvana. In combination, I was hoping we would be able to use all those features of Django that I talked about at the beginning, and not throw away pieces of Django as we migrated function to the front end. So we could use Django's form rendering and validation. That was always a big thing with me in front-end frameworks. Like, you have to validate the data on the back end before you put it in the database. So you need to do something there. And if you need to do it on the front end as well, you're duplicating things if you're doing it, unless you're doing it. So that was always a big thing with me. So I was really excited by the possibility of being able to use the back-end form framework from Django that is very robust and allows you to hook in validation that is very sophisticated without having to duplicate all that logic on the front end and make changes in two places when you need to update things. Similarly with user authentication and URL routing, I thought there's features in Django that I just saw weren't getting used because the front-end framework was doing it and duplicating things. So I guess in the last, maybe it's 2.5 to 3 years we've been using this. We had one fairly good-sized greenfield project where we used this combination. It was a project where we had initially thought we would be using React. But as we started to learn about these tools, and as the client was interested in also possibly using these tools, he's fairly technical, we decided to take the leap and say, okay, let's try this tool combination for this new greenfield project. And it had a few phases, and it's launched one version of it. But there were fairly sophisticated forms where users had to make choices, and based on the choices they made, other things got shown. And so there was a fair amount of front-end sophistication to it. Sophistication sounds a little bit more, I don't know, maybe a little higher than we achieved, but it was a fairly, this client was very focused on the UX of the user and making sure that their experience was good. So we certainly needed something more than basic HTML. And we enjoyed using this combination of tools in building this thing from scratch. We've also added it to existing projects, both little CMS projects, not little CMS projects, but CMS projects with adding a contact form or something where you could use htmx to submit it and make it more user-friendly. And I've had one project where I was adding a new feature, which was much like an old feature on another page that had been implemented with jQuery. So my initial thought was, well, I'd just like redo the jQuery for this new feature in this new case where I needed to use it, or extend the jQuery that existed. And as I looked into it, I was like, this is ugly. So I tried doing it with Alpine, and that worked out well. The thing I don't know yet is if I go back to it in 6 months, am I going to understand it? Or am I going to have the same reaction to that Alpine that I had to the jQuery that was there? So we'll see. But that was a positive experience for me. I enjoyed doing that. And the big thing that sort of on non-tangible benefit that I feel like we had as a result of using these tools is more of sharing and blending of knowledge and roles between people who are traditionally front-end and back-end. We had some people who didn't know Django when they joined Cactus, and they were front-end specialists, and through working with the templates, we kind of all came together in the templates and started to share more about how each of us viewed the world. And we got more with people who could, if you need to add a feature or a function, one person could do it and do the whole thing. Like you wouldn't have to have the back-end person do the back-end piece and the front-end person do the front-end piece and then kind of come together. You could have one of them do it and maybe the other one review it, and the whole thing would come out better. So there was more of a sense in our team that this whole project is ours, not like just the back end part is mine and the front end part is someone else's. So I really enjoyed that. We have very small teams, 2 or 3 people. It's really hard if your roles are very strictly compartmentalized. So the sort of expanding of the scope of abilities, I thought was really good. Let's see how I'm doing on time. Okay. So is everything bright and shiny? Maybe not. There are some challenges with this combination. Maybe I'll walk over here. What are the downsides? That was maybe implying this is the downside side of the room. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I didn't intend that. I just thought maybe I should speak from the other side. One downside I found here is, particularly if you're using Tailwind and putting bunches of classes in your HTML templates, and you're adding htmx attributes for your server interactivity, and you're adding Alpine for your user interactivity and state management. That's a lot. It can get to be a lot. And it's particularly odd coming from a very long-term Django perspective where their templates are not intended to be, where you have a lot of logic. Like the Django template language I was taught was intentionally not very sophisticated and intentionally made things not really easy to do so as to force you to put your logic in your models or your views, like your Python code. So there's a conflict there, I feel, that I'm getting over. But it is a lot. There's a lot of stuff that it can end up in your templates. And I worry, like going back to this code, am I going to be able to look at it and say, oh, I know what all this is doing, or am I going to be kind of confused, like, what is this piece doing? And I worry about it from the aspect of new people coming onto a project, particularly junior people who maybe don't know all of these tools yet. Are they going to be able to know that this attribute is htmx and this one is Alpine and this one is Tailwind? So I do worry about that a little bit. There's also some complexity of templated JavaScript, where you're supplying context variables to your template and including that in your JavaScript. And you kind of have to know that, okay, first the template is going to render this to a text string that is going to be JavaScript. And how is that going to work? So you have to know how to quote things properly and use escape.js to make sure that you don't have weird JavaScript coming up where you've got to, that happens a lot with strings. If you've got special characters in your strings, it might work fine without them, and then you test with a few more things, and all of a sudden everything's blowing up because you didn't escape the JS, and what was a JavaScript parameter that was a string got terminated early. So there's some complexity there with templated JavaScript that you can get around. If you're putting a lot of JavaScript in your Alpine, you can extract it out into JavaScript files and reference it from your templates attributes, but that has its own downside of sort of obscuring what that's doing. We also ran into, if you're putting your snippets of JavaScript in your HTML as attributes, and those are necessarily quoted, so you have another set of quotes you can use inside that if you need quotes. But then if you need quotes within your quoted string inside your quotes, what do you do? That can come up if you're using CSS selectors. A lot of times you need quotes within quotes. And you can use ampersand quote to do that, but it doesn't look very pretty. So what else? Oh, it's picture time. That's a lot of birds doing different things, making things confusing. Another aspect of this tool combination that I think is a bit of a challenge is reuse of templates. I'm a big proponent of reusing existing code, or when I'm asked to do something new that's much like something I've done before, I'm like, well, let's start with this and parameterize it and pass something in so that it knows to do something different rather than copy pasting it and changing it. Because I always think, well, 6 months down the road, maybe I'm going to be asked to fix a bug in that, and am I going to remember if it needs to get fixed in 2 places or 1 place? I think it's easier to have it in 1 place. It's a little harder when all of your presentation and all of your server interactivity and all of your user interactivity is all in the same place, sharing the same set of code. There's either a lot of parameterization going on, which introduces complexity, or you don't share it. So the ability to reuse your HTML templates, I found to be a bit challenging in this tool combination. And a lot of times we were using a pattern of doing small snippets of HTML for the presentation aspects of inputs and anything that was sort of reused across the site for the styling aspects. But then in some places, if we wanted to have some Alpine data associated with it in one case, but not others, then you might find yourself adding some Alpine data to an enclosing component that included something, and then you might update the include to say, okay, do this with this Alpine data, but then other places where it's been used, you don't have that Alpine data. So there's both a problem that introduces, that it doesn't work because you get a JavaScript error because you've got some reference to Alpine data that doesn't exist, and there's also from the looking at the small included HTML template, there's no context for where did this Alpine data come from, so that can be confusing. And also, if you're putting JavaScript in HTML files and you're not that proficient with JavaScript, you may miss having your editor highlight errors in your JavaScript code. Maybe that's just me. So those are some of the struggles that I've ran into with this tool combination. And basically, it can get messy. I ran across this one day when I was walking on the beach in the morning. I thought, wow, that's a lot of crabs that came out. I don't know where they all went. They made quite a mess on the beach. Overall, though, our assessment, I think, is this is a winning combination, and it has a lot of promise. And we do continue to use it. To address some of the issues that I talked about in the struggles section, I think I'd like to come up with some ideas and better guidelines for Alpine component structure. Like, when should you have the JavaScript in your template directly, or when you should extract it out into JavaScript files? Maybe we have some guidelines on that. And the other thing, I think, now that I've got some experience with the problems introduced by this tool combination, is I can better understand and appreciate some other tools that exist that would like to start investigating, maybe to use. And that's what I have on the next slide. I've heard about these tools. In some cases, I looked briefly at them, but I'm one who needs to understand the problem before I accept a solution. Like, so if you tell me this is a solution to something that I haven't hit yet, I have a hard time understanding it. So these are several tools that I've heard of, and that now their descriptions speak to me in terms of that might solve a problem that I realized we had, or an issue we had. One is Django Form Set, which is a package that provides better UX for Django forms. And my impression is, I haven't delved deeply into it, my impression is a number of the things that we wrote from scratch to enhance the user experience of the inputs that we had on this project, this greenfield project we worked on, we maybe would not have had to do if we just used Django Form Set that I didn't know existed then. Like, maybe we didn't need to handwrite all these Alpine components that we came up with, because Django Form Set provides a more general approach, to enhancing the user experience of Django forms without having to write it yourself. Django template partials is another one that I've heard about. There's a pattern with htmx that you end up, if you're going to render just a part of a page without Django template partials, you wind up having to extract any of those little parts of pages into their little tiny templates so you can render them, and that's a little bit odd at times. And I believe Django template partials would solve that for us. And then for the lot of stuff in templates and the reuse of templates, there's two things I've heard about: Django components and Django Cotton, that both offer ways to build components with Django templates or extend Django templates. Like I said, I don't know these things yet, but there are two things that I have on my list to sort of dive into and better understand before I tackle the next big greenfield project that uses these. So I think in wrapping up, this is the beach access, the end of the road where people leave their flip-flops. And I kind of feel like we're all on a walk on the beach using these new tools. We've left our flip-flops behind, and we may be stumbling across things other people have done on the beach, like building sandcastles, and we're appreciating that. And I would like to encourage sharing the information we have gained about what works and doesn't work in this combination. So that is my talk. And I have plenty of time for questions, if there are any.
Yeah, I'm curious about your thoughts on when to use HX Boost versus when not to use the HX Boost, or if you should ever use HX Boost.
Remind me what HX Boost does. I have a vague recollection. It's been like,
cool.
I've been working on Django upgrades all summer.
Yeah. So I probably should have led with that anyways. So HX Boost is sort of like an attribute you can add to, say, the body tag of a page, right? And it'll basically say that every call to the server, whether it's a form, action, or an A-link, will be made using JavaScript.
Using htmx?
Yes, and it avoids htmx attribute overload, but can also come at a cost where it can take, especially if you use it on the body tag, it can take over everything, and you'll have to eventually go back and say hxBoost equals false. But you can, I guess the promise of it is you can specify a generalized target once, and as long as you have a generalized template, you can do everything with that, and it makes the HTMX side of things so much simpler.
Obviously, based on my having to have a reminder of what I had heard of it, I don't think we've used it. Honestly, I've had more overload from the Alpine than HTMX. So I haven't really encountered, and I've been able to sort of better compartmentalize the HTMX into its own templates that can be reused versus the Alpine. So I have not used it much. It might, I don't know how, if you have hxBoost on the body, how do you know what URL it goes to? What path does it?
So.
Oh, I guess, well, it would have to be,
Yeah, so if you have it on the body, right? So that means every tag is, as long as there's a href attribute set, right? It goes to that.
Then
right?
it's going to use that.
And then on the back end, you just check to see whether the hx request header is set, and then you serve the partial template. And then based on the target that you set on that body tag, that results in where it goes. And then you can set different targets for different things. So like for forms, you can set a target for, like, say you have a form open in a modal, right? You can set the target on the form for the modal, right? And then once that form has been processed successfully, you can send another header that says, hey, let's retarget this back to the main content ID from the body tag, or the main content that you were normally using. So it makes the update seem more seamless.
Sounds like something to use. It sounds like it may move some key information out of scope of what you might be looking at. So it might not make it real clear when you're looking at something what it's going to do. So I might be kind of careful in using it. But if it's a pattern that's established in a project, then it might be an easy way to avoid having too many HTMX attributes all over the place. So it depends, I guess.
That's usually a good answer. I'm curious, using your analogy of walking on the beach, are there any really great shells you found along the way that you still keep on the mantle and admire on a regular basis with this tool set? Things that really made you, when you found them, made your eyes get big?
If I can remember. So this one greenfield project we worked on, we did a whole bunch of stuff about, it was moving potential participants in something through a bunch of states. And each time you did that, there was a different form and different information you had to supply. So there were these, and they're fairly sophisticated forms. So we had built all that out. And then in the second phase, something that we had to do was also allow for creation of these potential participants in whatever state. So using a combination of HTMX So the new thing was much like all the old forms, only at the top you had to say what state this individual was going to be in when they were created. So you choose the state, and then htmx, you can grab the actual detailed form that you need to fill out. And we ended up being able to, without change, entirely reuse the existing change state forms by using htmx to go fetch the new. And there's a combination of the htmx. So this, you change the selector and the form underneath changes, and something on top needed to change as well, which you could do with, I think, there's actually 2 ways you could do it. You could do it with htmx out of band, or you could do it with teleporting in Alpine. And we ended up doing it with teleporting in Alpine because using the htmx, we were using the htmx API there, and it didn't support out of band. So it's just, in a lot of places where I was using it, like you come across a new situation, say you'd been using htmx, I think it was htmx, and identifying what you wanted to submit or replace or something by identifier, and you wanted, actually I would just want the closest form that I'm in, and you could do that. Like, just looking at the documentation and finding that you didn't need to do anything special. It was supported out of the box by just reading the documentation. So that kind of thing. I mean, we had a lot of good experiences with being able to do things very quickly. But I don't know that there's one particular, like, there's just read the documentation. There's a lot that's provided without a whole lot of effort.
Cool. And this one comes from Jeff Yen online. He's asking, do you feel that any of your current or future projects might approach a level of complexity which would be not well handled with htmx and Alpine? And if so, what tools would you look at for that?
I don't. We do CMSs and a lot of forms. We don't do, I haven't had to participate in any projects which had, like, and even that I'm not even sure, like, strong user interactivity, like the things that Chris May mentioned that might push towards using a fully baked front-end framework. We don't really do that. I haven't had worked on projects like that. So for me right now, and if I were to think I wanted to have it like that whole app on the front end, I would probably question whether I should use Django on the back end, or should I slim down the back end to make it clearer that this is where this function is done. It's done on the front end, and the back end is just an API server. And you shouldn't think about doing templating up there. So I might, if I were to have something that I thought needed a big front end framework, I might question whether we should use Django for it or slim it down. I'd have a hard time giving up a Django admin though. So.
Hi, thank you very much. This was very insightful.
Where
one
are
thing
you?
I'll say is that I'm relatively new to the community, but I have been catching up quickly. And one thing that I'm kind of curious about that I just don't seem to understand yet is, why does the community seem to pivot towards, htmx and Alpine as opposed to just standard JavaScript files? Is it quicker for development, or is there something more intuitive I'm not understanding?
For me personally, I came up before the JavaScript, any of them really were, there weren't, maybe there was Backbone or something, but I learned back-end development. So I had these tools that knew how to do things, and I knew how to use them. And then as the front-end frameworks became more and more capable, functions moved to the front end. So for me, it was like, I would rather use tools I already knew than learn a whole new set of tools. it seemed to me, and a lot of to me, it seems like a lot of the taking JSON from the back end and turning it into HTML on the front end duplicates a lot of the things you could do more efficiently on the back end. So that's one aspect of it. And the overlap of function, having the function, I'd rather have it in one place, and it, like data validation needs to be on the back end. So that's why I gravitate more towards keeping the logic and the advanced function on the back end versus writing JavaScript for it. That's probably mine. Did that answer your question?
We have a couple more minutes.
Hi, Karen. I'm curious whether any of the projects you've worked on so far have had any accessibility requirements, or whether you've noticed anything in terms of meeting like accessibility standards with this particular combination, whether it was easier, harder.
We have not had any strong accessibility requirements on any of these projects. We have tried, as we are developing, to include accessibility helpers, area labels and stuff as you use things that maybe you're creating tabs with divs or something. I mean, to indicate, yeah, we've tried, but we have not had any requirements from clients to meet any particular standards or do anything. So we haven't rigorously validated that what we've done is actually working very well. I have not noticed it's any harder to do with this set of tools than with just bare Django or bare JavaScript. But I don't know what kind of support you have with JavaScript libraries. Maybe they offer more than I'm aware of. So
I've been going on about this all day yesterday and today, but I'll shut up eventually. Have you seen Hyperscript?
I have looked at it and decided to go with Alpine.
Okay.
And I also heard, what is his name, Carson Gross, talk about it, and sort of how he spoke of it kind of warned me off using it, even though he's the one who's building it, right?
I have used it in a couple of projects. I find it really nice. It uses fewer attributes than Alpine does.
Okay.
Which makes me happy.
It uses more of a natural language syntax?
Yeah, he's described it as HyperCard for the modern web. And I think it's really slick. But
I think my worry about it and my reason not for going down that path was lack of clarity around what exactly something is going to do when it's not so clear based on the syntax of whatever. But I don't have any experience with it.
Thanks. Good talk. One thing that is kind of annoying about Tailwind is the really long classes that come out of it. So there are different ways to deal with that. What do you do?
Tailwind?
Yeah. As part of that, like, is it something that you deal with? If it's not, then no stress.
My own inclination is to go back to extracting out those long strings of classes and put more symbolic names around what it is I want this thing to be.
Okay, like primary button.
But that I feel like I have not yet had the courage to
delve into it.
To go forward with proposing we need to stop putting these long strings of Tailwind classes in all our HTML. Okay. And it seems like it's counter to the prevailing thought. We this has nothing to do with Alpine and htmx, but it does have to do with Tailwind. Like, we have a project that needs it provides reusable things that need to be styled differently depending on which site it's on. And so we have in that project extracted out all of the Tailwind into CSS files that get built, and we use higher class names on the HTML so that you can easily restyle it with just a different style sheet. But that seems to go against how people want to use Tailwind. And so personally, I think that might be an easy win for getting a lot of the complexity out of the templates. But like I said, I haven't had courage to go forward with proposing that.
You and I together, we can.
Awesome. That's all the time we have today. So give it up for Karen.
Thank you.